All right, let's get right into it. For millions of people, Alcoholics Anonymous is pretty much defined by one thing: its core text, the big book. But, how we understand that book today was massively shaped by one very specific, very detailed interpretation that basically went viral across the recovery world. We're talking about the work of two guys who became, well, absolute legends, Joe and Charlie.
So who were these guys? Well, they weren't the founders, they weren't doctors or anything like that. As they always said, they were just two members of AA, Joe McHugh and Charlie P., who happened to meet back in 1973. And what brought them together was this shared obsession they had with the big book. They were convinced it was written in a very specific sequence for a very specific reason: to get people sober. And what started out as just some chats in their living rooms and hotel rooms, it just exploded. They made a tape series they called The Big Book Study, and it became what a lot of people still consider the gold standard in the recovery community. Their step-by-step, page-by-page journey through the book became the way that tons of people learned the AA program. So what was it they were actually teaching?
Well, Joe and Charlie's approach was really simple. They said, look, before you can even think about a solution, you have to know exactly what the problem is. And they went right to the source, to the big book itself, and specifically to the ideas of a guy named Dr. William Silkworth, who was the doctor for one of AA's co-founders.
Their breakdown of alcoholism is just fascinating because it has two completely distinct parts. First, you've got the body's reaction, which they call a physical allergy. The second an alcoholic puts any alcohol into their system, this crazy physical craving kicks in, and they just can't stop. But that's only half the battle. The other part is all in the mind, a mental obsession. It's this idea that's so powerful it convinces the alcoholic that it's totally okay to take that first drink, completely ignoring mountains of evidence to the contrary.
And Joe and Charlie really drove home this idea of insanity, but they were super clear. This doesn't mean crazy in the way we usually think of it. For an alcoholic, it just means having a mind that's less than whole, but only when it comes to alcohol. It's a mind that, at the worst possible moment, just can't see the truth and ends up making a terrible decision based on a complete lie.
And to show what they meant, they used these incredible stories pulled straight out of the big book. These weren't just theories. These were real, lived-in examples of this bizarre kind of thinking in action.
So take the story of Jim. This was one of their go-to examples. Jim was a smart guy, everyone liked him, but his drinking had completely wrecked his life and he ended up in an asylum. But through the early AA program, he got sober. He got his family back, he got his job back. Things were looking amazing. He had everything to lose.
And then, one day, just out of nowhere, this thought pops into his head. Just really think about that for a minute. An ounce of whiskey in milk. Every bit of logic, every painful memory screamed that alcohol was total poison for him. And yet, his mind just cooks up this completely ridiculous idea and serves it to him like it's the most reasonable thing in the world.
And he did it. He acted on it. And that one drink, based on that one insane thought, kicked off the physical allergy, sent him on another destructive run, and landed him right back where he started. It's just this perfect, stark picture of the mental obsession.
But you might be thinking, okay, that only happens to people who've really hit rock bottom, right? Well, to answer that, Joe and Charlie would immediately bring up the story of Fred. Fred was the complete opposite of Jim. He was a high-bottom drunk, a successful partner in a firm, great family, beautiful house. He hadn't lost a thing, at least not yet.
See, Fred had stopped drinking, and he was convinced his own willpower and self-knowledge were all he needed. Then, one day, he's feeling great, not a care in the world, just wrapped up a successful business trip, and this thought just floats into his mind. It seems so harmless, right? But it was just as illogical as Jim's weird milk idea. It told him he could do the one thing he'd proven over and over again he couldn't. He bought it, and the result was exactly the same, another disaster.
So here's the absolute key point they made. It doesn't matter if you're a low-bottom drunk like Jim or a high-bottom drunk like Fred. You get drunk the same way. The body's physical allergy, that's just what happens after. The real problem, the actual battle, is the one that happens in your mind before you ever pick up that first drink.
Okay, so if the problem is this two-part illness with this totally baffling mental piece, then what on earth is the solution? That's exactly what they got into next.
And this is really the million-dollar question, isn't it? Both Jim and Fred knew they shouldn't drink. They both really wanted to stop. But when it counted, their own minds betrayed them. So if you can't rely on your own mind, where does the defense come from?
This, right here, is the absolute core of the solution as Joe and Charlie laid it out. The mind that has the problem can't also be the source of the solution. You just can't think your way out of this kind of thinking. The defense has to come from somewhere else. It has to come from what AA calls a higher power.
And this diagram that they used in their seminars really shows how it all fits together. You have the fellowship, other people who get it, providing support and hope. But the actual defense, the thing that stops that insane thought, comes from a spiritual awakening, a deep change in how you think and see the world. And you get there by taking action, by using what they call a simple kit of spiritual tools, which are the 12 steps.
Now, this spiritual solution isn't about just, sitting around and hoping for the best. Joe and Charlie stressed over and over that the Big Book lays out a very specific, very practical program of action to make this change happen.
In fact, the way the book is written follows this exact logic. It's brilliant. The first part of the book describes the problem, the allergy, and the obsession. The next part describes the solution, a power greater than yourself. And then the rest of the book defines the action, the exact steps you need to take to connect with that power.
And this program didn't just fall out of the sky. It was built through trial and error. By 1937, there were about 40 sober people who had used these principles. They decided they had to write a book so the message wouldn't get watered down or changed as it spread. They wanted to nail down exactly what worked.
And this is a point that Joe and Charlie just hammered on. They would point out words in the book like precisely, specifically, and exactly. They argued that this was not a book of suggestions or nice ideas. It was a set of clear-cut directions, like a recipe. Follow the directions, you get the result.
And this leads us to the most important and maybe the most controversial part of their whole message. They drew a hard line in the sand. They said there is a huge difference between the program as it's written in the book, which hasn't changed since 1939, and the program you often see practiced in the fellowship, in the meetings. Their argument was that the fellowship's message had been diluted by ideas from therapy and treatment centers, and it had lost that original precision.
So why did this matter so much to them? Well, they believed the results spoke for themselves. They'd point right to the Big Book's own claim that in the early days when people followed the book to the letter, 75% of those who really tried got sober. And they would contrast that with their own estimate from their time of a recovery rate below 10%.
And that message, that call to get back to the basics, it really struck a chord. People listened. It's estimated that since 1977, more than 200,000 people went to one of their Big Book study seminars. Their interpretation became this massive movement inside of a movement.
Which really leaves us with this final, fascinating question. The whole legacy of Joe and Charlie is built on this idea that the answer to a timeless problem was figured out, perfected, and written down way back in 1939. In a world that is constantly changing, with all our new understandings of addiction and the brain, can a set of instructions from almost a century ago still be the gold standard? That's a question that people in recovery are still grappling with today.